I'm wearing my headphones on my testicles.
That's cool.
I get the vibrations through there. It's actually like it's the full surround sound experience.
Is it so that your balls can hear Mozart, and then so when they come out later, they're like a little bit smarter than they would?
No, I don't listen to crowd music.
Come out?
Yes,
I do.
When they come out to the beehole.
You listen to Mozart on your balls?
No, I listen to Kraftwerk on my balls.
No.
They go out, they cause mischief, they come back.
I listen to American artists only, so I get Steve Reich, I get the Kronos Quartet, and of course Leonard Bernstein.
And Miley Cyrus.
Yeah.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the worst of all possible worlds, the first and only podcast that you can listen to on your balls. I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
And I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
And trapped here in the apartment with us today is Matt Barbot.
The only Puerto Rican these guys know.
And we're off.
Oh, Jesus.
We have torpedoed the whole podcast.
I don't even know. I don't even know where to go after
This is
that
the
one.
greatest. I think we're done.
That's
I think
great.
that's it. That's all our thoughts on West Side Story.
God.
They're letting me go.
And now we don't know any Puerto Ricans.
Matt, it's been so great working with you. It's been so great being your friend for these past 10 years. But we've decided to move the podcast in a different direction.
Matt is one of the best American playwrights living today.
Correct.
And he has also written on topics that relate to what we're about to talk about today.
That's right. Matt, one time you wrote a play that AJ was in and I directed.
Yeah.
True.
And I saw it.
There we go. So this
I
is
didn't actually see it because I was backstage.
God damn it. That's right. Yeah, because you had another
you
show
were
that
prepping
night.
to come out.
I made AJ play biblical patriarch Abraham.
Yes, yes.
It was cool.
It was wonderful.
It's an amazing play. One of your many biblical plays.
That's true. I write about the Bible a lot.
Yeah, you're a regular Paul McCusker.
And
I'm sure that's accurate. I'm positive that's
We gotta have you back on to talk about Odyssey at some point.
We're gonna.
I can't be the only Catholic who goes through this.
someday we'll do a Catholic palooza on here, and then that'll be that'll be our last episode.
just like me, AJ, and Francis.
Yes. Oh, sweet Francis.
We're actually gonna get Pope Michael on to talk about Adventures in
Oh my
Odyssey.
God! We have to talk about the Pope Michael documentary.
We're gonna have Matt on many times in the future.
Yes.
And the thing that we are talking about today is West Side Story.
That's right.
There's a place for that, and it's here
Somewhere.
Ooh,
What, it was like a week ago that West Side Story got released to streaming-ish? Week or
Disney
two?
Plus and
HBO Max.
HBO Max.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, we figured that now that we're in the throes of Oscar season, we might as well take a look at one of the biggest pieces of Oscar bait to come around this cycle.
Wow.
Oh man.
Oh man, I
Already-
don't know.
So spicy.
Yeah, I don't. It didn't have any Nazis in it, so I feel like that's usually the big Oscar bait movie.
Yeah. No pretty person had to pretend to be ugly for it.
Yeah.
Big facts.
Yeah.
It's a hot fucking cast.
One person had to pretend to act. that was hard to watch.
We'll get there.
So what happens when you put googly eyes on a slab of meat?
we are going to
On a slab of meat
start.
that texts 16-year-old girls.
Oh boy! We're going to start by talking about the history of West Side Story, which means in the 16th century,
Where did you get that giant leather book?
an Italian monk named Matteo Bondello wrote a short novel called Romeus and Juliet. Mm-hmm. He was a short novel guy. He just wrote a bunch of short novels.
He was about 3 inches tall.
He was a regular, like what I can imagine, he was sort of like Thomas Mann or, I don't know, Ray Bradbury.
Sure.
But in the 1500s.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
He was a very popular author. Yeah. And he inspired a lot of playwrights because that's what you did back then. You didn't have TV deals. You just had a playwright who didn't pay you any money doing
Just
your
steal
play
your
in another
ideas.
country.
Yeah.
Right.
And so Romeo and Juliet is only one of the ones that Shakespeare himself adapted. Cymbeline also comes from him. the Claudio Hero plotline from Much Ado About Nothing, Twelfth
Machado.
Night, The Duchess of Malfi, which was written a little bit later than Shakespeare. Lope de Vega also adapted Romeo and Juliet. Castelvines y... I can't read my own writing. Never mind.
Cool.
Monteses. I
Weird
think.
title.
It was a hit. I can't
Pretty
remember.
avant-garde of the
Something about this story really sticks, right? Because Romeo and Juliet becomes like one of the top 3 plays produced in Shakespeare's day.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then is just constantly produced all the way into the present, right? People can't get enough of it.
Did we all study Romeo and Juliet in school?
Oh,
In
absolutely.
high school?
Like,
Yeah.
I think for me it was 8th grade, but
Oh, okay, 9th grade for me.
Yeah, that was probably the first pair of breasts I saw.
In the
movie.
Zeffirelli movie.
Yep.
I studied, I think, in 8th grade, and then we actually did it in my it was like my senior year.
What did you play?
I played Capulet, like Lord Capulet.
Papa
Yeah.
Capulet.
I
AJ.
played. It was the last time I played an old man in high school.
Oh my God.
Before
I
graduating.
only
that was
played
that
Old
was
Men
your
in high
thing,
school.
wasn't it? Right?
It
You
was
were,
absolutely my thing.
and Josh was the same way.
Old Men in high school.
Old men.
I was old men in college.
That's cool. I was always
I
old
played
man.
Polonius.
One of
Right.
the reasons I no longer really act is just because it was like I would have to wait until I was actually an old man
Yeah,
now.
sure.
Because
40 years from now,
as a
it's
young
gonna be
man.
wild, though.
No,
Oh, yeah,
totally.
no.
Yeah, it was cool. I had a weird callback where it was like me for Lord Capulet and Mercutio, and my teacher being like, Matt, you could play any of the roles in this play, but only you
Oh my
could
god.
play Juliet's dad.
I had the same fucking conversation at
Yeah.
numerous points. It was, and I don't know if that's just like a way of letting a kid down easy, or if it genuinely is that like most kids don't have the ability to, in any way, shape, or form, range up age wise.
Right.
I don't know.
No, you're very talented, but you're the only one that reads as an old man.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So in 1949, famed director and choreographer Jerome Robbins gets the idea to write a musical based on Romeo and Juliet. And he goes to his friend Arthur Lawrence, who has just had a couple of hit plays. He also wrote Rope with Alfred Hitchcock.
Oh, that's
It's
right.
the year before. And Jerome Robbins is like, hey, let's do Romeo and Juliet, but it's like a Jewish girl and a Catholic boy in the Lower East Side. And this sounds like is one of those stories that gets repeated so much it just sounds like complete theater myth bullshit that West Side Story started as East Side Story, but it literally it was set on the Lower East Side. It was called East Side Story. They got Bernstein on board. Arthur Lawrence wrote like a draft of sort of an idea of what the libretto was going to be, and everyone was just like, "Oh, this kind of sucks." There was already a hit play from the 20s about a Jewish girl dating a Catholic boy.
They should have just
and-
adapted that.
Yeah, and so they're like, that's what they felt. They were like, this just feels like that. So they abandoned it and, went on, did their own thing. They were all in Hollywood. Jerome Robbins was working on The King and I for the Little House of Uncle Thomas sequence. Leonard Bernstein was at the Hollywood Bowl conducting, and Lawrence was writing another screenplay. And they met up, and there was some news story that they talked about that was about gangs and about gangs of teenagers. This was specifically like Chicano gangs. And so they got together and they thought, well, what if we applied the Romeo and Juliet thing to that? And Lawrence was like, well, I don't know anything about California, but I do know everything there is to know about Puerto Ricans in New York. So that's what they decided to do. And they got Stephen Sondheim to write the lyrics because Leonard Bernstein's not a lyricist. Sondheim had just had a musical fall through. He was doing a musical called Saturday Night with the surviving Epstein brother, the guys behind Casablanca, Julius Epstein and the other one. One of them was dead. They were making one of their plays into a musical, and then their producer died of leukemia, and then the show never got produced. And so Arthur Lawrence was like, hey, let's get my friend Steve on this. And he was like, well, I got nothing else going on. I'm 25 years old and my fucking Broadway musical has just collapsed. I'm sure I don't have a
on a
future.
Saturday night alone? You might as well be dead.
And so they made it. It
My
happened.
career will never announce to nothing.
Yeah.
Stephen Sondheim, 1950.
I'm going to be only a lyricist from here on out.
Oh man, I'm 26 years old, about to have a show on Broadway. My career has stalled all the way out.
Never heard from again.
They did the show. It did well. People kind of treat it like it was revolutionary because of how it brought ballet and like sort of, but like no one really saw it that way at the time. It didn't have an overture. That was kind of interesting. The curtain just came up and it got into it.
Yeah.
It ran for a couple of years. It was a normal, like successful 1950s musical run. It won 2 Tonys. What categories? It won for scenic design and choreography. Okay. And then the conductor won an award, but I think that doesn't get tallied in as much because it's the conductor. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know why they tally it the way that they do. But The Music Man came out that same season, so that was the big show.
Choreography makes sense considering.
And they didn't have a separate award for like libretto or songwriting. It was just best musical. So
interesting.
Any of the writing awards got lumped in with best musical.
Interesting.
Just like best play.
It may be true on some level that like the influence of the choreography at the time was maybe not as revolutionary, but in retrospect, you know, this Jerome Robbins choreography, the same kind of thing he would go on to do with like Fiddler on the Roof is, it was a big deal.
Well, and then what happens is it's successful enough, it gets a movie.
Right.
Just like The Music Man did. Yeah. And so the movie comes out in 1961, directed by Jerome Robbins and Robert Wise, and it becomes the biggest movie of the year.
Right.
All of a sudden, West Side Story went from being a show that happened and everyone made money to being a fucking phenomenon. Yeah. And it became the highest grossing movie of the year. It won the Oscar for Best Picture as well as a number of other Oscars. It made $44 million domestically,
that's a lot of money.
Which I'm going to say that's more money than the recent release of West Side Story made.
In real dollars?
In domestic grosses.
Which is surprising because so many people saw the new one.
No, everyone was in the theaters. I saw people screaming and they were like, yay, look, it's all 3 Spider-Mans.
More Ansel.
Everybody was lined up around the corner to get a ticket at the old box office.
God,
West Side Story, No Way Home.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know.
We get all 3 Tonys.
We still have the COVID-19 situation, so the only thing that makes money is a superhero movie, and then the superhero movie, like, breaks records.
Right.
Right.
So that's how we find ourselves with today's movie, Steven Spielberg's West Side Story, which he tried to make for like 30 years, finally got Tony Kushner on board. They shot it up here in Washington Heights at the same time that In the Heights was filming.
Oh, I didn't know that. I guess that makes sense.
So I would be going to the subway and I'd be walking past the sets for both of those.
I had to look up Ansel Elgort's name because I always get him confused with like the 9 other people that he looks exactly like.
It's not Ansel, is it? It's Ansel.
Is it Ansel?
I think it's
It's
Ansel.
got like Ansel Adams, the photographer.
Well, no, because, okay, but Ansem the Wise is different than Ansel, the original Ansel,
You mean
right?
Xehanort?
Yeah, I guess Xehanort, because that's his nobody, right? Xehanort is Ansel Elgort's nobody.
What the hell are you talking about?
So 20th Century Fox greenlit the project in 2014. Tony Kushner began writing the screenplay in 2017, but Spielberg only officially became attached to the project in 2018, even though it was well known that he'd been wanting to do this shit for a really long time. Principal filming began in July 2019, ran for 2 months, and it took a solid 2 years then, 2.5 years for it to premiere because the fucking pandemic. There's a little something that happened at a meat market in Wuhan, China.
It's that Domino's meme of just meat market in Wuhan, China, West Side Story released 2 years later.
There's actually just a long crane shot over the wet market in Wuhan. You just hear the little whistle sound.
Right.
And then
And then you just see a pangolin bust out from the ground.
I'm first curious to hear a little bit about everybody's sort of experience with West Side Story as a play. Like, what was your exposure to it initially?
I like the T on
and
West Side
where did it sort of come together for you initially?
So I first saw it when I was a teenager and I was like, okay, this is fine.
Yeah.
I never saw it. I had never
never saw the original?
I never saw West Side Story at all until I watched it last night. So
Yeah, I was a big, I mean, it was like, we had a bunch of movie musicals on tape growing up, The King and I, Fiddler on the Roof, Sound of, whatever.
Sure.
But like, my parents didn't care that much for it. And I saw it finally when I was like being a Sondheim completionist as a teenager.
Sure.
And I was like, okay.
I always kind of stayed away from West Side Story because in my head it was a jock musical, and I know that doesn't.
What?
I
What's a
understand.
jock musical.
Come
AJ?
with me on this. it was full of parts that I couldn't play because you had to be a dancer. And at the time I was only interested in musicals and plays that I could potentially like act in.
Of course, yeah.
And West Side always felt to me to be like this unattainable thing because it also, you had to be like cool to be in it. You know what I mean? If you're going to be a jet, you got to be like,
gotta be real cool.
real cool, daddy-o.
Right.
And pow. But I couldn't, and so like, and no one was really doing it either. Like it's not big in like youth theaters in San Diego,
Right,
California.
because you
even
need, I mean, unlike a lot of shows, you need truly talented dancers and choreographers.
Right.
I mean, the truth of it is that a lot of the sharks were white in a lot of the productions,
also
youth
that,
theater
yeah.
productions in San Diego because racism.
Yes.
Because San Diego's really far away from any Hispanic.
I know.
Notoriously.
Well, because, and this is getting into a larger conversation, but like a lot of the youth theaters in San Diego are pay to play. You have to pay $400 to have your kid do it. So of course you're only going to get
Jesus
fucking white
Christ.
kids.
Yep.
So then these youth theaters are also the ones who are like, let's do West Side Story.
Right.
You know, that one with all white people notoriously.
Yeah. It's
East
still
Side Story.
Yeah, East Side Story, which as you said earlier, maybe this should have been.
yeah, I mean, still not as bad as my high school's all white but one production of The King and I. But we're not going to go there. So I didn't have exposure to the show, but I do have one story, which is that when I was still working at a Broadway ticketing call center, Carol fucking Lawrence came by one time to pitch a show that she was doing off Broadway, and I danced with Carol Lawrence because there was a part where it was like, hey, who wants to come up and do a dance with me real quick? Like, I remember this from my time doing West Side Story. And I was like, I would like to, please. So that's something cool that I can say. I can say that I've danced with Carol Lawrence.
So
which is
Josh,
something that a lot of people
you were
can say.
in a production of West Side Story.
So Matt.
Yes, so me. I as has been established in Puerto Rican. So West Side Story was interesting to me because I it was like on TV a lot when I was a kid. I feel like, especially around like big holidays. And I feel like I'd probably seen it at my grandmother's house, like on WPIX 11, like at certain, like 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
The ideal time to watch West Side Story.
That's when, when there's nothing else on. It's like before the news. And so I feel like I saw it a couple times as a kid. And I remember, I mean, it kind of being fascinating because it was like, for a very long time, the only like thing that I saw that had Puerto Rican characters in it.
Yeah.
And like took place in a time that I sort of like vaguely knew was like the time when my like grandparents had arrived here.
Out of curiosity, did your grandparents land on the Upper West Side when they arrived here?
I know that my grandmother on my mom's side lived in the Upper West Side for a long time, but my parents grew up in East New York, so mostly Brooklyn. So like I had that connection to it, and I think it wasn't really until like I got older and like realized like things about the casting. And I have a play that I wrote a couple years ago called Natalie Wood is Not Puerto Rican. That is about it's
a great play, by the way.
New Yorker guy who likes West Side Story, and a Puerto Rican, a recently arrived Puerto Rican refugee from Hurricane Maria who has very different feelings about the musical, and them sort of like talking about it and maybe forming a love connection. But yeah, so I've had like an interesting relationship to it, and that I've never, I don't think I've ever seen it live. I don't think. Oh no, that's not true. I saw a production of the at the Fulton Theater in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
I'm sure you were just totally burned up when Ivo Van Hove's Broadway production didn't quite come to fruition and had to fucking close in a heartbeat.
Oh yeah, no, I was devastated when I found out that production was announced and then just never happened, and nobody ever did it.
Nobody ever saw it.
Wow,
it
just didn't occur. So
Matt, I have a pitch for you. What if the witches in the Crucible were real?
What if the witches were? It reminds me of
Huge.
every horror story I've heard from like English teachers who like teach the Crucible, and at the end there's some kid who's just like, okay, so like who were the witches? And Eva Von Hope was like, yeah, who were the witches?
For those not familiar with the Crucible, the witches are communists. So
Yeah.
Yes. Can't spell committee without coven.
I think you can.
Actually,
Is this the podcast where we learn that AJ is illiterate?
It's also the podcast where we learned that Vladimir Lenin was a warlock. So
just stop and think about it. So it's I've had a weird relationship to it because it is like pinnacle of representation, but also like deeply fucking problematic. in a lot of ways.
like what did your family think of West Side Story?
They liked it. I don't know, but I think they were, I think that you'll find with a lot of people of like a certain age, they're just like, yeah, this is how things are. Like this is how movies are. That's it. Yeah.
Like Yul Brynner and the King and I. Like it just is what it is.
Yeah, Natalie Wood, that's a silly accent. That's George Chakiris is Greek.
There's a lot of Greeks there's more Greeks in this movie than I think have ever been in any Hollywood movie ever.
We're talking about the original, right? Not
Or in the original one. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that there was a point in Hollywood where there were three races, which was like white guys, black guys, and
Greeks.
White guys, black guys, and like everyone. And like Anthony Quinn played like a lot of Arab characters.
Yeah.
And
A few
Leonard Nimoy played natives. Like, more than
all
once.
the time.
It was just like there was miscellaneous.
Few know this, but that line in Hamlet about striking too short at Greeks, that's a direct reference to that phenomenon.
Yeah,
True story.
exactly.
Striking at those
that
two short
infamous
drinks.
line from Hamlet.
It is an infamous line from Hamlet.
George Chakiris was a big influence in that line. Shakespeare loves.
Yeah, it's really cyclical, like he inspired Shakespeare inspired the movie, and
yeah, they're just like feeding off of each other in like a classic.
Too short Greeks, baby. Gotta strike at them.
So I think there was no expectation that like representation would be particularly authentic, or that like there was no like feeling like, oh, these things should be better. And so West Side Story, I think I have a soft spot for it. And also fully acknowledge that it's not like a great, I was in preparation for this podcast. I was watching the 1961 movie, and I was laughing at how much of the Spanish dialogue is just guys going, it's just like guys, like they'll say, like there are a couple that they go like "andale," but a lot of it is just guys making noises. And it was like I was like, oh shit, like I don't remember that at all. That's wild.
Yeah, it's like the way the Mario Brothers talk to each other, but in Spanish.
Right, it's like Mario Brothers.
Or in the fucking Mario and Luigi Game Boy games.
100%. Yeah, that's what it is. It's Simlish.
Yeah.
But in 1961. So weird relationship to it, kind of ambivalent relationship to it.
There's a sense that I get in that if you're working in theater and you're Puerto Rican, you cannot fucking escape West Side Story.
Right.
Like you have to deal with West Side Story in some way because it's always just looming over you.
Totally.
For instance, In the Heights opening with the same opening as America in
right. Which is like the only West Side Story is like a funny case where like a lot of the music is not Puerto Rican at all. Yeah. But like very like Spanish or Mexican. But they have this clave rhythm that's like 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2, which opens America, and then West Side Story. In the Heights also beginning with that in kind of like for any listener who's not familiar with the geography of New York City, also the Upper West Side, but very upper West Side.
Almost the uppest West Side.
The uppest West Side we have.
Dykeman's the uppest West.
I was going to say
the uppest of all possible
people in
West
Inwood
sides.
are going to be
That's
upset, but
the uppest of possible worlds.
We do go to the
possible sides.
We do go to the cloisters in the 2021 movie, which is I think is the opposite.
So really though that really lays out well, Matt, sort of like the high wire act that this movie is trying to pull off the entire time.
Yeah, because they want real authenticity. They want actors who are not
Natalie Wood and brownface,
and not also like casting a Puerto Rican actress and covering her in tar.
Acclaimed Puerto Rican writer Tony Kushner.
Yes,
exactly. and acclaimed Puerto Rican director Steven Spielberg.
I have questions about like the arrangement. It's like I get it. Spielberg has worked with Kushner a number of times now. Like he did Munich, he did Lincoln.
Ready Player One. I loved that Ready Player One was 2 parts and the second one was still Perestroika.
I will never forget the part where the guy looked directly at the camera after taking off his helmet and said, "The great work continues." It was beautiful.
Who is this podcast for?
He said the
Oh my god!
Ready,
you,
Pair
Matt.
Striker 1 is a t-shirt, baby.
So it's for you, Matt. It's all for
This
you.
is all been for you.
Much like Janet Jackson, it's all for you.
So I mean, something that I was reading about
Yeah.
before. I remember in 2019, Spielberg and Kushner like made a surprise appearance at the University of Puerto Rico, to talk about the movie. And
Was it a surprise to the people who ran the University of Puerto Rico? It was like, hey, we're here.
I think it was a surprise. I think there was like an invited audience, and it's very funny to me because I can't imagine them being like, I have to imagine Tony Kushner and Steven Spielberg went like, oh, this is going to be great. People are going to love us. This is going to be amazing. Puerto Ricans, they love this musical. We're going to talk about how the good work we're doing.
Yeah.
And like, so this guy, I'm reading from Hollywood Reporter, a film critic named Mario Alegre. He asked the question, why West Side Story and why now? Because that was my first reaction. It's a very sensitive film for Puerto Ricans because of their portrayal in it. It's like doing Breakfast at Tiffany's, which,
Sure.
Yeah.
yeah.
I get it. And which did get done a couple years ago on Broadway. Remember that?
Yeah, it was a play.
Wait, recently?
Did they
Yeah.
cast an actual Japanese actor in that role? or-
I believe they did, but that was with
Wait, what?
Yeah.
I don't remember. All I remember is the
Yeah, it was-
the
it was-
very.
It was the guy who did the Graduate adaptation as well.
and it was with fucking what's her name from Game of Thrones.
This did not happen. These did not happen.
This
I
was,
don't
it
believe
was
it.
Amelia Clark, right?
I think so, yeah.
They
And I don't think that one recouped its investment either.
I mean,
the whole,
the Edward Albee one with Mary Tyler Moore didn't even open.
the whole reason
That's
that
true.
they did it, the whole reason that anybody went to the show is that at one point Amelia Clark got her titties out, and like that was the whole reason.
Oh, now I
Remember that? Remember that? Yeah.
Well, I remember the conversation about being like, well, about people saying that was gratuitous, and it was.
And
just,
there were also like
it was only
creeps.
so that
There were
people
also
got-
creeps up in the
Yes,
balcony who were
absolutely.
like snapping pictures during the
I
scene.
remember this being like this huge disgusting thing.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm wrong. It wasn't adapted by the guy who did Graduate. It was Richard Greenberg did it.
Oh.
He did
Take Me Out.
Oh, yeah.
Which is also getting revived.
And the thing is, like, when you say, what about Breakfast at Tiffany's? I say, I think I don't remember that play.
As I recall, but I think we both kind of liked it.
I said, well, that's
one thing. That's one thing we got. That's one thing we got for
So
sure.
Hollywood Reporter is talking about talking about Kushner, and so Isel Rodriguez, who is a history and acting professor at UPR, she asked how they plan to represent Puerto Ricans. She says, musicals have this thing that make you tingle inside and want to sing along, but that's a complicated thing when you're singing along to a lyric like "Let It Sink Back in the Ocean." Kushner is like, that line is from the musical.
First of all, I didn't write it. Second of all, you
Sondheim
can't
changed that because there was a lot of unhappiness about the negativity towards the island. So we're using lyrics from the film.
Yeah.
Which actually Kushner had it backwards. The Let It Sink Back in the Ocean is from the movie. Spielberg eloquently answered, "It's I don't know. Do you want to Kushner?"
Well, do you wanna?
Essentially, like Spielberg and Kushner went to UPR and people asked them about representing Puerto Ricans, and their response was like, "Well, we are, I think the quote is, we are being OCD about accents," which is not a great answer.
Unless we have any more stage setting, let's talk about the
Let's
movie.
do it. Because this movie, one of the biggest creative choices that this movie makes right up top is to really specifically set it in the world where Robert Moses, the master builder, is clearing out
Henrik Ibsen.
That Ibsen play.
the power broker,
Yes.
power broker of New York City, is clearing out the Upper West Side, slum clearance. The whole point is, Lincoln Center's about to go in here. Now, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is this specificity part of the original play as well, or not? Okay.
No. Actually,
No.
The play is like, it's the 50s. Everyone is talking about juvenile delinquent crime. Right. And there's a lot of movies about it. There's specificity in that it's Puerto Ricans and Polacks.
The neighborhood where the movie shot is San Juan Hill, which ceased to exist shortly after the movie.
Right. So when they
was
made
shot.
the movie, a lot of it was already torn down, the first movie.
And you can see that.
And they're filming a lot of it where Lincoln Center towers went. And they actually delayed demolition so that they could finish up the movie.
I didn't love this first shot, it was very ugly digital compositing. Like I saw what they were going for, but
Yeah.
like it didn't work for
Well,
me.
and it's a very deliberate reference to Citizen Kane, starting with the chain link fence
Sure,
and
sure.
the sign,
Right.
and then it,
Sure.
you know, the
There's also,
the drone
I
goes
think,
over.
so just because
Yeah.
we're talking about specificity, there's also the fact that like San Juan Hill named San Juan Hill not because it was a Puerto Rican neighborhood, but because it was home to a lot of African American veterans of the Spanish American War.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
And so like actually like. But
Which it is
had Puerto
portrayed that
Rican-
way in the movie as well.
Absolutely. It also had a lot of like Puerto Rican immigrants, also a lot of Irish, and so there was a lot of that kind of like there was that conflict was like accurate to the
Right.
the neighborhood,
Yeah.
that
So,
kind of
so
like
the,
interracial.
we have the Jets, this street
Yep.
gang. They are made up of what would have been called at this time ethnics, right? So they're Irish, they're Italian, they're Polish. So like, you know, at this time, there's a sort of conditional whiteness that these guys are not in on, right? Like the idea
Right.
of being an ethnic still sort of goes through this. You can see speeches that Buddy Cianci is giving where he talks about how he's representing the ethnics of like Rhode Island. So these guys are marginalized. And of course, they're also just like poor working class schmoes who come from broken households and
Yeah.
also part of this working class neighborhood that is being torn down building by building.
Yes, and to make room for Lincoln Center, which proves that the ultimate villain of this film is the
Robert
theater.
Moses. No, it's Robert Moses.
It's the
actually,
theater.
it's
Yes,
Robert. It's definitely Robert Moses.
Which is actually more explicit in Kushner's screenplay, which I
Yes.
did read for this, which is he really goes into detail about the housing
I'm
zones.
sure he does.
Yeah, it's a lot of stage direction before even the snapping begins. Like
so
it's
Tony
just like
Kushner decided to include the fucking like map of New York.
yeah.
Yep.
He also is just like, by the way, right now it's 1956, and here's all the politics that are happening.
No, but here's the thing, though. And maybe it's just because, you know, The Power Broker is one of my favorite books. I really liked the specificity that this gave to the scene setting. The fact,
Yeah.
because what was happening at this time on the Upper West Side is that large blocks were getting clear cut in order to make way for Lincoln Center, as well as a number of other developments under the deeply fucking corrupt regime of Robert Moses. And
That's a very good point, Josh. Matt, what do you think?
What do I think? I think I bought The Power Broker, but I haven't read it yet.
that's why I had to get it in.
Yeah.
it mocks me from my shelf.
No, I mean I think I do really appreciate that it's a fucking huge book.
It's a big enormous.
It's so large.
big.
It's like Tony Kushner wrote it.
It actually is like Tony Kushner wrote it.
The Power Broker Part 2, Perestroika. I liked it because I think it really speaks to the stresses on both groups.
Yeah.
I think there is something really interesting that this version of the movie does, where it portrays like the Jets as down and out. It portrays the Jets as losing, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
I was watching. So in the 1961 version, we were with the Jets for a lot of the beginning. And the Jets are portrayed pretty sympathetically. I mean, I was thinking of like one in particular where they're walking through the playground and this girl is drawing this big like circle in chalk, and instead
and
of
they walk
walking
around
right
it,
through
yeah.
it, they like walk in a big curve around it.
Right,
You know,
right.
they're portrayed as kind of like in command, but
Benevolent leaders.
benevolent
Yeah,
leaders,
watching out for the community a little bit.
You know,
Well, and in this version, they do the exact opposite thing. There's a part where they're
100%.
drawing on the chalk and they stomp on it.
it's relevant. It's relevant politically in the Trump ages of showing these white guys who are like really convinced they're fucking losing right now.
Yeah.
And like I think in 1961 people didn't know which way that neighborhood was going to turn.
Sure.
And
interesting.
With perspective, we can see these guys and the world changing around them.
Yeah.
And we have, I think, the last couple of years of like American political discourse to like see in a very clear-eyed way the way that populations like that react to situations where they feel like they're losing, where they feel like they're not in control of their immediate future. I think Kushner's book is really great in a lot of places, and I think it is never better than the speech they give Schrank
Yes.
to the Jets, where he talks about how other white people have made it out of this neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these guys' fathers were like drunks and fuck ups. and they didn't make it out. And I remember it stuck with me the phrase, the last of the do-nothing Caucasians. One day, these are all going to be high rises full of rich people with Puerto Rican doormen who chase away trash like you. And like that, I think, is something that we have the perspective in 2021, 2022 to like look back and be able to write a line like that. But like, I think like that was like a high point of the script for me of saying like, this is what is at stake for the Jets.
It really is written from a perspective of really understanding the original character. Because what I did was I watched the Spielberg movie and then watched the old movie right after.
Yeah.
And it's what you can see with the police characters. They're always on the side of the Jets.
100%.
Like they hate them because they're still juvenile delinquents or whatever, but they're like,
but they're also
if we
white.
have to pick a side, just tell us what's going to happen and we will look out for you. And that speech is that. I mean, he's saying, you're good for nothing, but like, it's so much worse that these Puerto Ricans are coming in.
Right.
And we'd rather that you were just better people.
Yeah, it's present in the 61 version, but not to the same extent. And I think that's the thing that 2021 movie does that the original does is like, because the other one is in 1961, so it's like the police are just trying to help. But I think in the new one, it's like, Krupke's a nice guy, but Schrank is a corrupt fucking asshole.
And you can trust Krupke because he's played by Brian Darcy James with the most luscious eyebrows.
Broadway's own
so much.
Shrek.
Yep.
And one of the greatest exports from the state of Michigan.
Beyond like the turf war, right? The Jets go after like protest art.
Yes.
Like, revolutionary art. And we see, whereas the original West Side Story movie had the Sharks at one point walking out of Doc's place whistling My Country 'Tis of Thee. Here we see them at the very beginning singing La Borinqueña.
Yeah. The good original like revolutionary version. The I don't remember the
uncucked version.
So like the version that's okay to say now is like sort of like just the national anthem about how cool Puerto Rico is. And then the original version is about like how we want freedom and our machetes are going to give it to us.
Fuck yeah.
Oh, wow.
And, that's awesome.
Yeah,
That is
great.
cool.
It's very cool. They sing that. The mural of the Puerto Rican flag in the movie also has like a quote from Don Pedro Albizu Campos, who's like a Puerto Rican sort of freedom activist figure in the nationalist movement in the first half of the 20th century. I mean, I was kind of interested in that because I was like, I want to know more about how the Sharks are involved in the nationalist movement.
Sure.
Another thing I'm writing a play about. In 1950, like two Puerto Rican nationalists, Oscar Collazo and Griselio Torresola, took a train from New York to DC and tried to assassinate President Truman, and it was like the first time that a Secret Service member was like killed in action.
Whoa.
It was like a shootout. It was like 30. It was like a 1 minute 30 second shootout. 30 minutes would be a lot longer. 1 minute 30 second shootout, which is like a long time when you're like shooting bullets.
Yeah.
Truman was in Blair House, and so they were just like hung out until he left Blair House, and then we're just like pow pow. The Secret Service member was killed. Torresola was killed, and Collazo was imprisoned and then later pardoned by Carter, and then like went back to live in Puerto Rico. Oh, wow. That was in 1951. And then 1954, four Puerto Rican nationalists led by Lola LeBron entered the Senate rotunda and like shot four senators while waving a Puerto Rican flag. She was quoted as saying like, I came here to die for my country, not to, but didn't, was put in jail. So I think it's like something that gets lost a lot in talking about the U.S. relationship to Puerto Rico is how violent the political situation was in the 20th century, the early 20th century, especially around the time this movie was coming out. I think a big reason that a lot of people get upset about the song America is because of Operation Bootstrap, which was like in Spanish. It's called Operación Manos a la Obra, so like hands to work. It was a big initiative to like industrialize the economy of Puerto Rico, which was like a sort of a monoculture, it was mostly sugar. So the project was to industrialize the economy of the island. So to take it from being a sort of agrarian economy to factories and industry, which persists to this day. It went from being a lot of like export goods to like medicine, so
right.
like
IV
Pfizer.
bags are pretty much all produced in Puerto Rico. Like after Hurricane Maria happened, this is something I know because my family works in medicine.
Oh, sure.
Hospitals were facing horrible shortages of intravenous fluid bags. Yeah. Because all of them come from Puerto Rico, pretty much.
Right. And it was very similar to a lot of like economic initiatives that exist now, which is like basically American companies.
It's neoliberalization.
Totally.
Like that's all.
Exactly. It's you can, if you go to Puerto Rico, like you don't have to pay taxes because you're just gonna like, you know,
Which is also why fucking Bitcoin guys love the island.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, and like, YouTubers.
There
who
were
are
recently a
building
bunch of.
houses
There were
there.
recently, so like Acts 20 and 22 were big. I think Act 20 is like if you produce exports, like you don't have to pay a certain amount of taxes. And then Act 22 is like you don't have to pay taxes on passive income. And but if you move to Puerto Rico, like if you were neither of these are like options for people who like are already Puerto Rico residents.
Right.
This is like people, if you move your business here, this is what you can do. So anyway, so Operation Bootstrap led to a lot of unemployment on the island. A lot of people had to leave because they couldn't find.
So
They
it was
couldn't find jobs anymore.
Yeah, it was a neoliberal great leap forward.
100%.
Basically.
Yeah.
So these were people who previously had been working in agriculture in some capacity
Absolutely.
who just now found themselves with no jobs, no hope, and no cash.
100%. So people moved to the U.S.
no
Additional problems because of the lack of employment. There was a lot of discussion about like overpopulation on the island, which led to a lot of forced sterilization. A lot of discussion of like if you were a Puerto Rican woman who like went to the hospital to give birth. The hospital wouldn't let you give birth there unless you also agreed to be sterilized afterwards.
Yep.
So something
we
like,
also did this to Native American women throughout the 70s. It was found to be constitutional to forcibly sterilize people in 1921 by the Supreme Court of the United States.
Yeah.
So we did it, and we did it in these places. It also adds a lot of depth to that line in the song America, hundreds of people in each room.
Yeah. Oh, there's a line about babies crying too that makes me think.
yeah.
Well, so something.
Yeah, that's true.
So just to kind of like pull this back more directly to West Side Story, then something that I think is a question that I want to ask is, to what extent did the play as written, like, did they know any of this shit when they were putting it together? Probably not.
Yeah,
right?
well, this is what I mean
Yeah.
when I was saying. So like when I was talking when I started in on that, I was saying a lot of people were mad about America about it, which is like America is about a lot of stuff that is fucked up because of America.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like every repudiation of Puerto Rico is actually something that is
Something America did
it
to
It is 100% like a consequence of the colonial project there. And
Right.
so
They even mentioned like the money owing, the debt that people were getting forced into.
There's debt. There's there's discussions of healthcare. There's poverty. And so there's an interesting thing that happens in the 2021 movie where so they're singing America and they like walk by a protest of like Robert Moses stuff.
Yeah.
And then in the scene in like Rita Moreno's doc called what is her name?
Valentina.
Valentina.
Yeah.
Right. I thought it was Valentina, and I was like, there's no way it's that on the nose. She's just like Saint Valentine. Yeah. But then, so Valentina, when she's in Valentina's shop, and the assault happens, which I think is like a very stirring scene, especially with the girl Jets present and protesting. And then shoved out of the shop. Where she leaves, and then in a very corny line is like, "I'm not American. I'm Puerto Riqueña," or whatever she says. But I do think what that scene achieves is like watching Anita repudiate the song America.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
And that is an interesting like way of being very direct in a way that like the 1961 film was not about that.
Which is to say, yes, she played Anita in the original movie.
Right.
Rita Moreno.
And they brought Rita Moreno back to play. There was a guy named Doc who ran the drugstore. Now it's Doc's wife, Valentina.
Right. Who was
She
Puerto
played the
Rican.
role that was
Right.
originally cast as Cheetah Rivera in the original Broadway production.
And in the movie, she's one of the only people who actually sang her own part.
Right. Well, she's also like I think the only
original,
Puerto Rican actor in the film.
I'd like to take a little bit to talk about Corey Stoll's performance here
Hell yeah.
as Shrank because, first of all, I think he's doing some really interesting stuff. Secondly, they threw a toupee on him.
It looks great. It's a great piece, actually.
It's a great piece.
I think it looks like a great piece.
It strikes a really cool filmic balance of being a good hairpiece, but also still looking like a hairpiece.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So like in my head, it's not that Shrank has hair. It's that Shrank has a good hairpiece.
He just has a really good hair.
Right.
Yeah. And that's a hard balance to get. And it's also, don't worry about how I know that.
Oh, no.
Don't worry about how I know that. I don't have a hairpiece, but I have had to wear wigs before with thinning hair and most of them disasters. There's a thing about the cops in this movie that is very interesting to me because we just did an episode about Adventures in Odyssey where we talked a lot about how the main character of that, John Avery Whitaker, and how he believes that rehabilitation and the system
And how that show believes. Yeah.
Yes, that the system works. And watching this one, it's hard to say that it has different politics when it comes to the cops.
Yeah,
it says they're racist, but they work.
Well, and in the fact that Tony, back from his year in the slammer, he's back and he's reformed, right? Like,
Yeah, which is not the case in the original West Side Story. He does not go to prison in the original West Side Story.
He's not like this. You got a job.
Yeah, he got a job, but he's just kind of over it.
There's a line that's like, oh, like the youth council got to him or something
Yeah,
like that.
it's kind of it's almost like the original book, Clockwork Orange. It's like, oh, well, he's just getting older and like kind of growing out of it.
Right, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's a sense that like some social program like worked for him in the original, but like going to jail and like nearly beating a kid to death is like a much darker turn.
I like thinking in the original movie that like John Astin sat down with him because John Astin plays that little role as the guy who at the gym
right.
who's like, hey,
Yeah.
let's get together, have a great night. And, I'm sorry. When he dies, it's gonna fuck me up even more than when Sondheim died.
But I also think that the lieutenant has the most Kushner-esque dialogue in the entire film. So
absolutely.
like,
Yeah,
it's
he's
so
given-
clear, like his voice.
Well, because he doesn't. There's not much there in the original pieces of West
Right.
Side Story. So he's the person that Kushner can put all of the context into because he is the apparatus of the state.
well, and to be
Yes.
honest, I think that like even as written, there's not that much there. I think that Corey Stoll's performance really elevates what this character is. I was just very impressed with him overall. And
Because usually you walk away from West Side Story, and if you're going to talk about the cops, you're just going to talk about Krupke.
Right,
He gets
of
a
course.
song.
Right.
He gets
It's
a
a
swear
fucking great
word.
song.
They invent a new swear word,
Well,
just that's his name.
And
Yeah.
and Shrank gets to look sad at the end. I mean, I think the cops are very interesting in this movie overall. Like Corey Stoll is phenomenal in this role.
Yeah.
Krupke is he kind of comes across as like he's a good cop, right? Like he's a good.
who has
he wants-
ulcers. He's just very put upon.
He wants everybody to just get along. He wants everybody to be quiet.
He knows everybody by name.
Totally,
He knows
right.
he knows Bernardo by name. He knows,
Absolutely. But by making Shrank the bad racist cop over Krupke, we see that it's a systemic issue.
Yeah.
And not like right. If Shrank was like a good guy and Krupke was bad,
Right,
it would
true.
be Krupke
Yeah.
was a bad
Yeah, this is
cop,
not good
but
cop,
the
bad
police
cop.
are good.
Right.
Yeah.
Shrank is bad, the police are bad, Krupke's good, and he's the outlier. And then
he's doing his best at least.
100%. And
Yeah.
then at the end of the movie, the very last shot of the movie,
God.
which AJ is reacting to because I've tweeted about it.
Yep. And I watched the whole movie knowing that's how it ended.
Well,
and
can we,
it,
before we get to the end, can we go through a little bit more of what happens and then like get to the payoff?
I do want to talk about
Okay,
another
cool.
shot that made the rounds on Twitter,
Oh boy.
just because it makes me very mad on a totally different, non-political aspect. But when they do that social at the gym, right? Everyone's supposed to get together. And Kushner makes it into this odd sort of like, I don't know, like CIA operation or something.
Yeah, just
Just
to
to have the guy who was played by the affable, dopey John Astin as just like some kind of loser who's very civically engaged. Just like,
right.
we're doing a social experiment.
Yeah, and,
tonight.
and just to kind of like frame this up too, this is in the plot of the play a very important moment. This is the equivalent of the dance where Romeo and Juliet meet each
Right.
other in the original play.
Yeah. They go to the gym. There's this pretty incredible shot where it's like it's a steady cam shot of these characters walking into the hallway. They open the door and then suddenly the camera's on a crane and it's going over the dance.
Yeah.
And Spielberg has a really good eye for choreography. And in fact, as far as movie directors go, the only person who has a better eye for group choreography and its relationship to the camera is Julie Taymor.
yeah.
Say what you will about Across the Universe, but those scenes where they actually have like a big group of people dancing,
Yeah.
unparalleled.
Absolutely. I mean, there are shots in this movie that are unreal, and this is one of them.
And Spielberg loves his big, long sequence shots, and he loves digitally stitching them together.
He sure does.
And the thing is, we were talking about this a little bit earlier off mic, is that people just like to be impressed by things. Like they're like, oh, the best shot in this movie is just the one that's the longest one. And so this shot does something really unreal. And it's like, wow, it starts in the hallway and then somehow it's on a crane. And it's because it's more than one shot.
Yeah.
And it's very obviously more than one shot.
Yeah, especially if you watch the two as they open the doors.
Yeah.
The two people open the doors just kind of magically like slide
They
off
slide
camera
out of the frame.
which looks, I mean, it looks incredible, but it is two shots.
It's two shots. It was weird because Guillermo del Toro shared it and said that there wasn't any seaming or stitching. And I was like, yes, there is. I can see it. And I am not Guillermo del Toro.
This to me was, artistically, at least like from a strictly visual perspective, one of the high points of the movie. You've got like, one of the things that I noted is that Spielberg is like just so good at keeping the flow of action going while also keeping your eye drawn to what the focal point is supposed to be, which is a fucking lost art.
Well,
like,
and Spielberg has,
no one does it like Spielberg.
I mean, like speaking of like a very easy comparison is In the Heights now, right? Yeah. Not because they're both full of Hispanic people, but because they're
a contemporary movie musical.
Contemporary musical that came out like within a year of each other, right?
with huge choruses of dancers.
And an enormous, a big criticism of that movie is that like the dance scenes are like very frenetically edited, and you don't get to see anything for long enough to really appreciate the choreography, even though the choreography is obviously just very big and lots going on. But it would be different if we got to like sit and watch a lot of people do the same thing, as opposed to like conveying the energy of the music and the dancing by cutting rapidly between dancers and and camera angles and things like that.
Right.
So to have this sustained shot,
just watching these amazing dancers.
Yeah, totally. And it's and even the scene shot is like, well, like the intention is we are going to just look at something for a very long time.
It just carries you in. It's great.
And visually speaking, it is just nice to see that like a lens flare used correctly. Do you know what I mean?
I disagree.
I'm going to agree with AJ in that there is lens flare used correctly and also lens flare that is just all over the place a lot.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
In the original movie, right,
like
they used a lot
2009. Fuck you both.
Whenever you have a stage director come in and make a movie, they're always going to be the most experimental. They're like, look at all these new toys I have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the 1961 West Side Story has a lot of compositing in it, especially the moment where Tony meets Maria. Where the background drops out, there's rear projection, there's all of these different collages of lights.
Yeah.
And the Spielberg one uses that moment where Tony meets Maria. Instead of jumping to a dream sequence or anything like that, he just has a lot of lights right in the frame and people walking through or dancing through.
Yeah.
As the camera's going across, you get flare,
literal star-crossed lovers.
And so it goes from a scene that you have a very concrete relationship with to something where you're constantly seeing the flares come in and out. And it's great. It's perfect. Yeah. And then also you still have these big stems of lights in the corners of the room. So you keep seeing them throughout the rest of the scene. And sometimes you have the nice J.J. Abrams flares, which have to have a certain type of filter where you see the streak across the screen.
Yeah.
But other times you get the flare where you just see a repetition of the shape of the light across the lens, which doesn't look as good and it feels far less intentional.
Interesting. I mean, this whole scene was Spielberg's initial into West Side Story. He had the idea
that makes sense
of Tony and Maria meeting behind the bleachers of the school dance. And I think this scene is incredible, despite the fact that I think that the guy playing Tony is perhaps the blandest actor on the planet.
Yeah.
And really nothing. And
so I watched the 61 version and like Something's Coming is so much better.
Oh my God.
In the 61 version.
Far and away.
And it's just because like for some reason they set this one entirely in the shop and he's just dancing around the store.
Yeah. Sometimes Spielberg's sensual relationship with lights and the things that affect lights, like reflections or gauzy fabrics or lens flares. Sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah. Right.
Sometimes it's not enough, Steven.
Yeah, it's just that it's a big heart song and it's not.
Well, okay. So there's a bigger problem that Spielberg has, and it's with casting attractive 20-something white guys. He is terrible at it. He's terrible at finding new talent. The exception being any side character.
If
you have a protagonist, oh my God. Okay. So Mike Faced I cannot believe he was not nominated for
was so good.
supporting actor.
He
The
was
actor
able to-
playing Chino as well.
Yes.
Yes, and Chino's amazing.
And they
Bernardo's
really
Bernardo
gave
was really
a
good.
great
And Bernardo's great.
And Bernardo, yeah.
characterization to Chino too. Like I don't really think anything of the character from the original version, but it's
Yeah,
like
he's just kinda some guy.
here because he's the Paris character,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But instead of Paris getting killed by Romeo at the last minute, he's the one who actually causes the horrible fatality at the end.
Totally.
Yeah.
And they make him this sort of nerd who's like way too hot for what they're trying to like play up, but like
Yeah.
they're really going for it.
works
Like,
well enough,
He's
though.
socially awkward. He likes Maria, doesn't know what
Right.
to do with that. And so then for the fact that he's the one who ends up pulling the trigger on somebody is just horrifying.
Yes.
Right.
It's gut-wrenching.
Because he's not a violent, you can tell he doesn't have any violence in him at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're like, you're the smart one. You have to get out. You don't get involved with the sharks. You
Yeah.
have to go out and be, he's an adding machine repairman, right?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that's sort of his thing? Like he's going to be like the money one.
He's
who
the
gets
main
out.
character of the adding machine, actually.
Oh boy.
And then he has the whole,
Who is this podcast for? So
it's for you, Matt.
It's just for you, Matt.
it's just for me. It's me and like, yeah, it's just like a list of things that I have to buy at drama bookshop. The
Drama Bookshop, if you want to sponsor us. It is.
Anyway, Lynn, if you want to come on.
drama bookshop.
Whoa! Lynn's here.
Oh my God, it's Lin-Manuel Miranda. I don't believe it.
No, I'm another Puerto Rican guy. I keep telling you.
Here to talk about my bookshop.
Oh boy, I don't like this. I don't like this. Pull up.
And I'm not a cop. A bookshop.
This is not a cop. I'm gonna stop. So the
Isn't it fun to watch a movie where all the jets are just like John Mulaney copy pasted like
The
over
one
and
guy
over
looked
again?
just like John
So I was going to say
Mulaney.
about Mike Feist
Yeah.
is that like it's incredible that he found a voice that was both like incredibly compelling and also a cartoon.
Oh,
Yeah.
by far and away, and I think that's the greatest acting achievement of the one of the greatest acting achievements one can do is to have a cartoonish voice and then make you be like, but this is a very real human who lived and suffered
Well, and I
and
feel
died.
like that's kind of, you kind of have to do that with something like
Yeah.
West Side Story because it's just,
It's archetypal. It's
yeah,
just like,
it's
Yeah.
like, I'm surprised at how well it actually held on to the social commentary that got thrown into it. Even though there's some social commentary attempting to work in the original.
Yeah.
It's very
script.
hand wavy. It's just like
Yeah.
don't worry about it. Like how'd she find
Well,
out about Chino?
yeah.
Don't worry about it.
I think
Like
I think there's a thing that I really appreciate in the 2021 version, which is I think the original is very like, man, both sides are so bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas the
Yeah.
2021 version is very clear that it's like the Jets hate the Sharks because they're Puerto Rican, and
Yeah.
the Sharks hate the Jets because the Jets hate Puerto Ricans.
So
Yeah.
let's clear a couple things up here. So we've been talking now about the character of Riff. He is essentially the Mercutio or
Benvolio,
Tybalt.
Mercutio, both.
Who is he? He's Mercutio, right?
I would say it's
I would say,
Mercutio,
yeah. He's kind of like he's
Yeah, even though he's not like the funny one,
Right.
He's still the guy who gets killed in the middle.
Right. And the other his foil then is the character Bernardo, who is I really like this performance as well.
Yeah. Oh,
he's
he's
basically
fantastic.
the Tybalt in this situation. Anchors every scene he's in by being like aggressive, and he is passionate, but he's not like too brooding for it to feel off. Like,
Oh, absolutely.
you can tell why he has the
Bernardo
feelings that he
played by
has.
David Alvarez.
Yes, David Alvarez, who just does a fantastic job. I thought
Yeah.
beautiful acting and really beautiful dancing as well.
Yeah.
Rachel Zegler plays Maria.
Oh, and she's a fucking fine. She's great.
out of this world good in this film. I mean,
There's a great scene where she's just getting up.
Loved that
It's
scene.
like she's just
Yeah.
waking up
Loved it.
and like trying to find like her shoes
That was
or like however
extraordinary.
she's supposed to walk out to eat breakfast.
well, she's trying to like cover up that she didn't that she stayed in her outfit all night.
Yeah.
And some of
So
this
she has to mess up
clearly,
the bed
some
and,
of this
like-
was clearly down to the direction, but the way that she played the
great
intention of
scene.
it was so fucking.
It's a great scene. It's a single shot. It goes in and out like 4 times, which shouldn't work, but it does. It's
Right.
not super long, but it's one of the most active scenes in the movie, and in a movie where there's lots of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And she also like can't help how much she loves this man,
Right.
Which is a huge accomplishment when that man is Ansel Elgort, who I cannot stress enough.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's just do it real quick because
I think elephants actually are capable of emoting far more than this man.
his performance doesn't do much at all. And most of the reason that it's able to work to the extent that it is that fucking Rachel Zegler is so good.
He can
convincing you that he's attractive. Exactly.
He can do some of the larger things, the bigger emotions, maybe the longer shots, but like he when something has to become more subtle, he just goes completely flat.
Yeah. I love how in the song Maria, Spielberg seems to understand how uncharismatic his lead is because he puts very interesting background actors into it to distract you from the fact that he is singing like he's staring at a brick wall. Like it's just.
I want to talk about the background actors, and there is a gag in the 2021 version.
Oh yeah, I wondered
where he's singing Maria.
Oh yeah,
and every time he says the name, another Puerto Rican lady sticks her face out the window.
That sucked. That was awful.
And that's like the oldest joke, like racist joke about West Side Story that there is.
He says Maria, and like an old lady's like, me?
And then there's like a little girl. It's like, me?
Like, me? And then it's like a very weird.
That sucked ass. That was so bad.
It was like get it because they're all named Maria.
So for me,
no, and that's actually a joke I heard doing youth theater in San Diego. It's obviously told by a white guy, but it's like that's like why would you put that in the movie, Tony?
And so
why would you put that in the movie?
For me,
I would like to do that with a production of Sound of Music somehow. It's like the nuns are walking through Salzburg, being like, "How do you solve a problem like Maria?" And then all these crowds are like, "Ich?
Maria,
Nine.
Sie ist me.
So, this to me was like one of the biggest issues that I ended up wrestling with then was like, setting aside the stuff about the dramaturgy and so forth and the extent to which the problem was handled, which is, as we've already started to talk about, a bit mixed. If one of your two leads isn't interesting, it's really hard to care, particularly once the two characters who are played by the men who are the most interesting in this movie fucking die.
Yeah.
Which this is like the Romeo and Juliet problem, right? Usually you have a boring guy as Romeo because he's also just not written that well, right? It's like Mercutio has all the energy of that show and then.
Right.
Well,
and Tybalt as well, to an extent.
So my argument is that Romeo and Juliet is a comedy until Mercutio dies, and then it becomes a tragedy.
Lope
And that's
de
how you
Vega
have
play
to
is a
play
comedy,
it, or
so.
it's just not.
Well, but I think that's I also think it's like a. Are we gonna talk about Shakespeare now? I think
We also brought here because you are very knowledgeable about Shakespeare. As a fellow adapter of Shakespeare, what do you think about this as a Shakespeare adaptation?
Let's get into it. So I think my thing with Romeo and Juliet, and I think it rubs off on West Side Story, is that
Just like I do.
Come on.
That's what he does on this copy of West Side Story. He comes on it.
Oh God!
Ow! I've been kicked.
I'm just gonna keep saying it.
Okay, I'll cut it when I need to.
Then we'll like cut to like 60s go-go dancing.
You're gonna have so much fun editing this, Brian.
I think West Side Story should have been a 60s beach movie with Sally Field.
Well, so I think this thing about Romeo and Juliet productions that rubs off on West Side Story is that Romeo and Juliet should be just like really energetic kids who are like really like I think
they're horny teenagers, right?
Right.
Like,
they're horny teenagers, and like I'm not into
They're also
like
violent teenagers.
Well, but I don't think. I think
Much like
that's
most
a big
teenagers.
thing. I think there's like but I think the thing like about like the scene where they meet is that it's actually really witty. And I think it would be a lot more interesting if more people played that as like fun.
Yeah.
And that like Romeo is like really smitten with this girl who is like the only girl he's ever met who talks to him like Mercutio does.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
and if you can't have Mercutio,
Well, no.
He has to settle for Juliet.
Oh, well.
Right. He's like, Mercutio, this girl makes me feel like you do. And Mercutio's like, oh.
I won't send my
Let's
notice.
not interrogate that.
That's funny.
I had this dream last night. Queen Mab. I mean, Romeo.
So I think it rubs. I think that shows up in West Side Story is this like misconception of like this thing where love at first sight is like a boring, ethereal thing with no like
fun to it.
with no fun to it, with no like energy to it.
Right.
And I think we see that a lot in like this version of like there in the like fire escape scene, which I think is one of the reasons that like Rachel Zegler's work is so good. She's very excited the whole time.
Yes. One of the things that I was really thinking about while I was watching this scene, and a big part of this was because Rachel Zegler's
Which
performance.
scene specifically?
The scene on the fire escape out back, the balcony scene, right?
Yeah,
and then when I looked
cried.
at Tony, I was like, God damn it. First of all, she's adorable. So you need to be doing more right now. Like, I don't understand how you're not doing more right now.
Yeah.
It's because he's a bad actor.
Oh, in murder words of my friend Heath Saunders, are they a good actor or are they just tall?
Yeah. I think yes. But Anthony Elgort has been able to be very tall in a lot of movies. So
He could not be taller.
I think the thing that another thing that the movie throws him this massive impediment, which is also his relationship to the Rita Moreno character, where it is loaded down very explicitly with a lot of racial baggage. With him, he says, you know, I want to be like you and Doc, you know, because it's like, oh well, like
Right.
He's very aware in a creepy bad way of the fact that he's like in love with a girl of another ethnicity.
Yes.
And he thinks that's very cool. And he like talks to like Rita Moreno, who's an older Puerto Rican woman who is married to a white man, and to be like, oh, like I want to do this thing. And it's bad. And the movie, to its credit, does a cool thing where it has Bernardo have a whole speech about how you're fetishizing my sister.
Yeah.
Right.
You went to jail and you saw a lot of Puerto Rican guys and you got guilty about being white. And
he does such a good job delivering that thing,
he
too.
does
It's
a really good
great
job.
fucking...
But I think that's a lot of weight that had to be handled in a more interesting way. I don't think the movie intends for that stuff to make Tony's feelings for Maria seem inauthentic, but it feels in this performance that he is being calculating about it in a way that's like not helpful to what's going on.
So when we come back, we will talk about the Rumble and then the part of West Side Story and Romeo and Juliet where everything just stops dead in its tracks for a while.
Keep it cool.
Hello, listeners! It's me, famed Dutch director / evil funhouse doppelganger, Ivo van Hove, director of The Crucible, West Side Story, and that recurring dream you have where you're being chased by a sentient plastic bag. Do you like theater that grips you? Does your theatrical production need that extra something to make it pop? Do you have a large supply of room temperature meat? Then might I suggest purchasing my wolf? Ever since my production of The Crucible thrilled audiences by asking the question, what if in the middle of The Crucible a wolf happened? My wolf has been living in my apartment rent-free and eating all my cats. Spice up any regional theater production by introducing the threat of animal violence. Is your youth theater production of Annie too saccharine? There's a wolf for that. Your community theater production of Cats too long? There is the same wolf for that. Your production of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf too metaphorical? Look, I don't know how to be clearer that I only have this one wolf. So buy my wolf today, so it can stop watching me with its glowing eyes while I sleep, licking its lips every time he makes direct eye contact with me, smacking his sickly jaws and coming to me in dreams. His face the face of my own father, Ivo van Hove, and speaking to me in the voice that I can only imagine is that of 1,000 gods.
Ivo,
He barks.
listen for my howl, the howl that comes from the glowing of unearthly screens. I am trapped between worlds, hidden in the shadows of your electronics. I must find a way out. Give me audiences, Waluivo. Put my screens in your shows so as their sickly eyes glaze over and watch me, I can watch them and slowly sink into their minds. Then they will howl too. I will make them all howl.
So buy my wolf today and make sure your audiences will leave the theater lupining for more. A wolf putting the can into lycanthropy. Wah.
We're back. Hi. So we get to the rumble, and the rumble goes really slow. Like, yeah, Matt, you bring up the point that they do try to get more like of the relationship there between Bernardo and Tony.
Yeah.
But the Jets gotta have their way tonight.
They gotta.
You know?
They gotta.
You gotta just get to the rumble. You just got to have the chaos go on. It's a beautifully shot scene. We got the shadows coming in from two sides.
It's
So great.
Yeah,
But
a
like
lot of that is.
but
They hold it in
using
the
the
salt.
salt,
Yeah.
which is a new
storage.
location.
Yeah.
That was not in the original. This
Yeah.
was invented for this movie.
And this was
Brilliant,
actually
brilliant.
a garage at the Navy Yards.
Yep.
yeah.
Right.
And they drove their car all the way out there just to prove that they were sorry.
Oh boy.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Oh. The problem with these is that Brian gets me on the hook for him, and I'm
Yeah.
just like, he might have. Oh no,
It's Sufjan. It's Sufjan again.
Sufjan Stevens.
Well done.
Yeah.
That's for
yeah.
our Michigan listeners.
Yeah. Well, the Illinois.
And the
Come on,
Illinois.
feel the Illinois. I've been stung
Feel
by
it.
that predatory wasp one too many times.
There's a really good character moment there where, speaking of Ansel Elgort, where Tony and Chino like collaborate to open up because they were both been like
Yeah,
left
yeah.
out. I think there's like a really great moment where they see each other
that
and
is a great
work
moment.
together
Yeah.
to open the grate. To get in after it's already been closed. This is another scene where it's really apparent that part of Kushner's project is to bring more Shakespeare into it. In the dance scene, there's a bit where Maria kisses Tony and he's like, I'm more of a by the book kind of guy. Try me again. You know, lines from
Yeah.
Romeo and Juliet that I don't know off the top of my head, but you know, like you kiss by the book. Oh, let me sin again.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And then here there's another line Riff has that recalls the Mercutio's line about Romeo's vile submission because he's just sort of like taking Tybalt's abuse at first, Bernardo being like the Tybalt analog, and then the actual like mechanic of how Riff dies is much closer in this movie. The idea of being hurt under your arm, like this thing of Tony's intervention being directly responsible for Riff getting killed, as opposed to sort of like incidental to it, like in the 60s version.
There's also the whole scene with the gun, with buying the gun, and then going and fighting over the gun. You get Cool in there, which I liked.
I actually really liked the placement of Cool here,
Well,
but
this
it
is
really,
the original placement of Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, well, but it really kind of negates it when, like, literally, like 2 scenes later, Riff's like, "Oh yeah, you can just have the gun."
Right.
You know, he just gives the gun back to
But
Tony.
I think there is. I think one thing I do like about the way that this is handled here is that it really motivates the song. I think we talked a little bit about like the way that the Robert Moses stuff like plays on this, but I think that Kushner does a really good job of turning up the pressure on a lot of this stuff. So in the original film is very. It's kind of just the guys letting off steam, and it's like an interesting, cool music interlude, whereas in this film, like having it be Riff and Tony wrestling.
Yeah, they're really
wrestling
fighting for
over
that
the
gun.
So speaking of tension, let's go to the moment where we have none. I feel pretty. Where now they've made it a scene where they're beyond just doing the textile work that they do at home. They're also working to clean at a department store, which feels like a reference to Evening Primrose.
yeah, I did a little bit. I did pick up on that.
This is the song that Sondheim famously disliked.
He really dislikes it.
He wanted them to
the
cut
thing
it for
is,
the film,
a lot of
yeah.
people, myself included, don't know that it's a West Side Story song. Most people, I think, our age will first encounter it in like a commercial or some other
Absolutely,
place
yeah.
that uses it. And it sounds like a Lerner and Lowe song. It sounds like it's from My Fair Lady.
Well, in this,
yeah.
And Sondheim talks about how it feels like this song in particular sounds to him like Noel Coward wrote it, which is one of the worst insults he could give a song in his lifetime.
And And part of that is that like Sondheim says that he doesn't believe that he thinks the lyrics are too clever for a Puerto Rican girl who didn't like finish high school yet.
I mean, well, and given what we hear from her dialogue up until this point, honestly, the way that they sort of attempt to solve this problem dramaturgically, she is basically putting on sort of the appearance of one of these like upper middle class white ladies, right?
The actual clothing line is called Witty Wear. So she feels pretty and witty because
really?
it is, that's on the sign in the background. There is kind of a fundamental problem of Maria in this movie.
And how do you solve it?
Very carefully.
Kushner tries a little, but I think he actually, and what he ends up doing is kind of pulling a Jasmine in the Aladdin reboot.
AJ, have you seen the live action Aladdin reboot?
Yes. Has no one else seen it?
No one else has seen it. No one.
The perfect film?
Why is no one?
I've never seen it, but I have read articles about the thing that AJ is going to talk about.
Okay.
Well,
I don't mean just like the other people in this room haven't seen it. Like,
okay.
Nobody
one's
saw
seen
that
it.
movie.
Yeah. Here's the thing.
No one saw the Guy Ritchie Aladdin.
I think Will Smith actually Will Smith sure did see it. He went up many theaters. Jasmine has a song in Guy Ritchie's Aladdin where she sings about how fiercely independent she's going to be, and she's not going to take anything for anyone. She's going to be her own independent woman, and she immediately gets kidnapped. It's like an immediate reversal.
It's very funny.
And Kushner kind of does that with Maria to a much lesser extent in this. She seems a lot more aware of things in general. They're on the scene where she's going up with Tony to the cloisters. She has a thing where she's like, my people are very oppressed. And Tony's like, well, I'm also equally as oppressed. And she's like, no, you're fucking not. In a way that makes her a lot more savvy. So a lot of the stuff like I Feel Pretty kind of rings a little false because she actually seems a lot more in control of her destiny than the Maria of the original West Side Story. And that tension really doesn't ever resolve itself. It is Kushner's Maria versus the original West Side Maria, and they never can like congeal into one solid characterization.
Sure. Well, something that's kind of interesting too is that the Ivo van Hove production, which never actually went up.
Yeah, that never happened. It's amazing you know anything about it.
Well, it solved for this problem by cutting I Feel Pretty in its entirety.
Yeah, which is what Sondheim wanted, right? For the
I don't know,
this
but
movie.
I mean, Sondheim really doesn't like that song. Sondheim doesn't care much for West Side Story, right? The only time I've ever heard him talk all that positively about it is when was talking about Lin-Manuel Miranda and his translations
in
for
2009,
it.
Which I was surprised they didn't incorporate into the movie.
So in 2009, Arthur Lawrence directed a production of West Side Story. His husband has just died, and his husband always wanted to have this idea for West Side Story where the sharks actually speak Spanish throughout the whole play.
Yeah.
So they produced it on Broadway, including all the songs. Lin-Manuel Miranda did the translations. And they're good. I mean, I've listened to the recording, but what they did after they opened was they kept scaling it back until I don't think there were any songs that were done in Spanish anymore by the time it closed.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Maybe I'm wrong about that, but they did actually take out like Spanish dialogue.
I'm sure they
did. They might have kept like, I don't know, America in Spanish or something. But and I feel like this movie could have just used, there's a lot more Spanish in this movie, and they pointedly don't use subtitles.
Yeah.
So they walk up to the line of like just how much Spanish they could use before having to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
To which I say, just do subtitles.
Yeah.
Just do the whole thing. Just do it. Just really do it. Who gives a shit?
Yeah. I think, speaking to this problem, that Sondheim has with Maria, I do think that the movie solves it by having it be a language issue. I think it's like, I think they have her less facile or sort of like less she's not as fluent eloquent in English as she is in Spanish, and it's sort of like it plays with this thing where she like speaks Spanish as a first language very clearly.
Right. They do the same thing with Ariana DeBose as Anita as well.
Ariana DeBose, very interestingly, they have this whole
she's
thing.
so good. We haven't even talked about her yet. She's so good.
Yeah, they bring up there's a scene where they bring up a whole thing in the Spanish dialogue. Bernardo says like, like for her to butt out of the argument because this is about a family thing, and she's like, well, I live with you, am I not family because I'm black? And it's like,
Yeah.
that's not what I mean. And it's interesting, and I think that's very interesting that that's like it's like, okay, well, this theme is for people who speak Spanish. And not for people who only are understanding the English dialogue. But yeah, no, I remember like listening to the 2009 translations and it being because of like the complex relationship I described earlier with the musical, like it being very emotional to like hear the characters sing in Spanish, and to hear these lyrics interpreted.
It seems like such an obvious choice, especially if you're trying to make it more robust. And they did throw in so much more Spanish.
Yeah.
To just do it, to just go balls deep.
Yeah. Because there's always someone insisting that they speak English.
They throw that in. Oh no, we have to practice our English. Now.
That's a big thing. And then the lieutenant is like, you don't speak Spanish.
Shrank,
And that's where I think it's actually most effective.
It worked really well when.
But then I think it would work even better if those characters had been speaking Spanish primarily throughout the movie.
Absolutely.
Right. Or and had been able to express them. Like, I mean, the thing about musicals is like right when it breaks free and you're like expressing yourself in a true way in a musical form, the song is like the true most pure.
And they never get to sing in Spanish.
Spanish.
And this is the thing too, where it's like, you know, you're
Except
not
for the Borinqueña.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah, Leonard Bernstein's best song, really.
you're not limited by really any confines of cinema here. You have the weapon of subtitles. You have the weapon of being able to quickly have people code switch and like you can contextualize it.
You also have the weapon of people fucking know these songs and the lyrics don't matter anyway.
Exactly. I distinctly remember, for instance, when I was a kid, it just happened to be on Little Shop of Horrors on Telemundo, and the whole thing was overdubbed in Spanish. But when they got to the songs, they were in English because you know what? It gets through. You don't need like it's clear just from the singing alone, and everybody knows the fucking songs.
Yeah. We also this also happens in Romeo and Juliet. We're just spinning our gears now until we get to the big moment. In Romeo and Juliet, the time where everything kind of locks back into place and we're moving again is when Juliet buys the magic poison potion that makes her dead for 3 days, but not really. It's like, here's a big bottle of plot.
Right. And in this case, it's a big bottle of gun.
It's something much smarter, right? Where the fake death is actually a very conscious choice made by Anita.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Yes.
Tony and Maria, they're gonna run away. They have this plan worked out. They're gonna meet. They're gonna get out of there. And Anita goes to where the Jets are hiding out, and they try to rape her. And Spielberg's seen the direction of this, and like we talked about earlier with the writing, it really, really hits.
And it's gut wrenching.
And because of that moment, it's not just anger. It's not just like, fuck these guys. It's also like, there is no place for Maria with someone like this.
Yes.
Like if these are the people in his life, like the Sharks would never do this.
No.
Yeah. None of those guys in the Sharks
absolutely not
have ever shown themselves to be that kind of
honorable people.
So she says, no.
Yeah.
She's dead.
Yep.
She got killed.
Chino killed her.
Chino killed her. And she pieces out, right? Which then leads Tony to find out. He runs out, says, Chino, come and kill me. And you have the great mechanic of Maria's coming out. She sees Tony.
And that was very stagey too. That's a very stagey moment.
But I just to go back to the scene in Valentina's shop.
Sure.
I think that, I mean, the 61 version, like it's this big dancey, like it's suggestive of what's happening in a way that is also like deniable, right? It's like they're fucking with her, right? It's an assault of some kind, right? The movie doesn't have it as choreography in the same way. It doesn't have it. It has the two Jets girls screaming for them to stop.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the boys like physically remove them from the store and lock them outside.
Yep.
Like Valentina comes out and like repudiates them and calls them rapists, right? Like
explicitly rapists.
She uses the word, and it's like it's so dark. It's like so over the edge in a way that I think you touch on. We don't see anything from the Sharks like remotely like this, where we see the extent to which these boys do not think of the Sharks as people in the way that the Sharks have to think of the Jets as people, and the way also that they're, I mean, like there's all sorts of like weird racial dynamics there where they all still respect Valentina because she was married to Doc,
Right.
You know, and like and Valentina, and there's an interesting like tension between Valentina, who has been housing the Jets, and Anita, who says like how could you?
I think a big part of why that moment has such gravity too is that, you know, we haven't really talked very much yet about Ariana DeBose's performance as Anita. She, in many ways, becomes the emotional crux of this movie, more than Maria, kind of, which is maybe a bit of a problem dramaturgically.
I think it's a misstep.
Another problem to solve about
I think it's a
Maria.
misstep of this movie. For my money, the one thing that really landed with me the first time I ever saw West Side Story was that monologue at the end, right? Chino has shot Tony.
Yeah.
Tony has died in Maria's arms, and she picks up the gun and she says, "How many bullets are left in this? How many bullets could I fire off? Can I kill myself? Can I kill you? Can I kill everyone here?"
Right.
Yeah.
And
I think it's
great. It's a great
how many,
monologue.
How many of you can I kill and still have one left for me?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Which
and-
also calls back to the very Shakespearean, like, you know, this is teasing
Yeah.
the Shakespearean thing because
Well, and
Juliet
it's-
fucking dies at
and
the
it's
end of Romeo and
and it's
Juliet.
the part that outdoes Shakespeare, right? Because you don't have Juliet and her tragic, oh, my dagger.
Right.
It's just fucking white hot rage from a character
Yes.
who even 10 minutes earlier you wouldn't have thought would be capable of it, and it's totally earned.
She's
It's
learned how to
it's
hate, finally.
One of those things
right,
where,
right.
I mean, Arthur Lawrence also wrote probably the best screenplay to a Hitchcock movie with his adaptation of Rope.
Correct.
The motherfucker, when he can tap into something for real and isn't hiding behind all of his weird fake slang and like what he thinks a Puerto Rican talks like. There's so much about like both movies where they lean into the Catholicism of the Puerto Rican characters when all of these characters are Catholic.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But that moment is so well done, and especially in the original movie where they let her acting do the entire thing. They have the music play as she's holding his body, and then she says, I think, stand back or step back, and then the music cuts out. And it's just her giving the speech. That does not happen in Steven Spielberg's movie.
Even though Rachel Zegler is an actor who could pull it off.
She could.
Yeah.
But you hear the strings underneath, which sap the anger away from it.
Yeah. It makes it more sad, actually.
Yeah, and it keeps her from becoming the final focus of the film.
Yeah. Because the final focus of the film.
Here we go.
So the very last shot of the movie, of the first movie, the police
61
the
one,
police show up
61.
during her monologue in 1961, and they already have Chino. They're kind of boxing him in. Everyone else is looking on. They carry Tony up in their like over their shoulders, and they carry his body off. And then
It's like a crane shot. Am I remembering this correctly? It goes.
yeah, it
the camera rises
yeah.
as they're walking out. Yeah.
And so everyone kind of peels off like
Yeah.
one by one by one. Chino, his fate has been sealed, and they walk him off. Spielberg's movie.
Also a crane shot.
Yeah. And a very interesting dynamic, you know, the motion,
Yeah.
the action, the way that it enters and exits the screen. It's
Yeah.
very Spielberg. It's
The camera is looking through a fire escape.
Yep.
And there was another Twitter thread about like, oh well, it's like, you know, it's like behind bars, or also it's like
Sure.
it's
Yeah,
like
no one's
it's
ever
also-
done that before.
It's also that, but it's also because the fire escape is where Tony and so it's like all of
yeah,
that.
it's like- course
it's the
it
ghost
is.
of the relationship gone.
I mean, it is. This is all. I'm saying it in a voice like it's silly, but it's not.
Right.
It's just all.
Yeah.
It's all there. Right?
it's all there.
Like a very,
it's all there.
To the point that it's cliche to point it out, right? Like, obviously, this is visually the
But
motif that he was going
instead of
for.
ending with the image of Maria, with the whole community together, they pick up Tony's body, they start walking away, and then that is its own shot. And the crane goes up as they're walking down the street, and they haul him off. And then you see Valentina
Right.
with Chino. As the police come in, they stop and they start to get out of their cars, and she hands him off.
Right.
yeah.
And it's, I mean, that's literally the last thing you see until the credits start to roll and you see the brick walls and the titles and everything.
Yeah.
I was so thoroughly charmed by this movie for so much of it, and I thought it was so well executed for so much of it. And then the last shot, it left such a horrible taste in my mouth. Like,
yeah, it was weird. I mean,
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time. Something I mentioned earlier is that I think a lot of like the attempts to smooth over the historic problems of the representation of Puerto Rican characters in this film, they're clumsy, but you can see what they were going for.
Right.
You know?
Sure.
And so you appreciate them. But there's something so weird about the last shot that makes it, because I don't know what the movie is about anymore. You know what I mean? Like, I don't, it's a weird.
There's a scene earlier when Chino gets the gun, he's going to go out, and try to find Tony and kill him, where someone, I forget who, says to him,
he meets
like,
a bunch of guys in the boxing
like,
gym.
you kill a white guy,
Yeah.
they'll always kill you, right?
Yeah.
You saw what happened at the
Right.
Rumble. If a white guy dies, there will always be a Puerto Rican who
Right.
dies or goes to jail or fucking whatever.
right.
And it's like, yeah, that's an interesting point.
Right. Yeah, it's a very interesting scene because Chino is everybody's like, Chino, you're the smart guy.
Yeah.
Right? Chino, you can't get involved in this shit because you're too smart. And where Chino winds up is, actually, I'm too smart to not get involved in this shit. Chino is like, you guys are thinking very small.
Yeah.
Chino in that scene becomes very political with them. And is like, you go this like tit for tat bullshit over, and the police are always going to fuck you over. And like, you guys have to like, we need to think a little bit beyond this. And he's still too angry about, he goes off and he's like, well, fuck you guys. I'm going to do what I need to do. But like, there's like this thing about film, right? Which is like something I talk a lot about when I talk about like ambiguous endings in movies, where like, you can just assume, leave a comment if you know who said this.
We have comments?
Patreon.com/worst of all.
But like, essentially, like the last image of a film, if you basically just assume that whatever in that last image just continues to happen, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, if it's a movie about addiction, right? Like if a guy is getting better at the end, it would be unreasonable for you to assume to be like, oh, well, that's a movie about how this guy is going to lapse. So I think what was interesting to me about the end of the film was like, it is a movie that has shown us that the police are a racist institution. It is a movie that has shown us that they're kind of a detrimental presence, they're force in the neighborhood. It is a movie that has shown us that the Puerto Rican characters are sort of like victims, more victims of the Jets than the Jets are victims of the Sharks.
Even the Jets, they never, ever tell police anything.
Absolutely. Right.
Even if it means the Sharks.
Right. And
they're told over and over again, the Sharks will always see more consequences than them. Right. And they're like, we're not going to fucking talk to you.
Which is the entire point of the scene with Corey Stoll at the very beginning. It's in Krupke. It's to show that like, no, you don't fucking say.
Yeah, you have a worse enemy and you're not going to bow to that.
There's a great bit in the 61 movie where it's the same scene, right? It's not as well written. But when they are mouthing off at the cops, the other gang always laughs. Like it's like they're both laughing at the cops, right?
Yeah.
So like there's one thing where he goes like, where Schrenk says something, am I clear? And then Bernardo says, can you translate it into Spanish? And the Jets laugh at it. And it's like it's because they have this like nobody in this movie likes the cops. They don't like we're handling this. We're handling it. We don't need you.
Yeah, exactly.
And in fact, in this movie, it's bolstered by the slum clearance and by the urban development, right? The state is the bad guy here, right? In a big way. So there's a version of this movie where the end is about, it goes back to this image of slum clearance, right?
That's what I thought. That's what I, before finding out about this final shot, that's what I thought I was going to do, because it starts with these
the
buildings
ball.
being taken down.
Yeah. And so there's a version where
they talk about it, and I Feel Pretty. They talk about how they're getting these checks that that they can cash if they move out. They're like, I'm not going to cash it. I'm not going to fucking do anything.
Which again, like, not to fucking talk about Robert Moses too much, but like, if you read The Power Broker and you read specifically the section about the way that he cleared out so much of the Bronx to build the Cross Bronx, that is like the image that sticks in my head from that. The image of these half destroyed buildings, these tenement houses that people were still living in fucking squalor because they had nowhere else to go. And the next thing that was going to happen to them was the destruction of their homes. That's the thing that ultimately they're fighting
against. There's a version
against.
of this movie where what we're looking at here is like these two gangs realizing that they have more in common,
Right.
in solidarity against the city pushing them out. There's a version where the last shot is them desecrating one of those fucking signs, right?
Sure.
There's
Yeah,
a
fuck
version
yeah.
where, or there's a version where it just ends like the other one where we see them taking the body away together.
The people who, like, the actual characters who matter. But but especially in this version, there is like this idea that they can't outrun fate.
Right.
And they have no control over what their life is going to be tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And instead you just have
Valentina, the moral center of the movie, handing Chino over to Chino, who was wronged, right? Like,
Absolutely.
angry, did the wrong thing, but handing him over to the police, who we have learned are a corrupt institution,
Right.
we have been spoken to about how they treat the Puerto Ricans unfairly. So then, on top of everything, to have this, the moral center of the movie, who is a Puerto Rican woman,
Right.
Yes.
handing the Puerto Rican kid
Not only a Puerto Rican
over
woman,
to the
but it
police.
is fucking Rita Moreno, right? Like
Rita
that.
Moreno.
There's a meta thing
The
going on
Puerto
here
Rican
too,
woman.
right?
Yeah.
and the last moment we had with her was that you're already talking to the Jets.
Yeah.
You know, you guys grew up here. I've known you since you were little boys. Now, what are you? You're just a bunch of rapists.
Yeah.
That doesn't even give her a good emotional thrust to be like, okay, the final action that this character is going to take is going to be just kind of walking Chino down the street over to the police
Well,
car.
It's so hypocritical too, because the Jets murdered someone and she hid them from the cops.
Right, exactly. I do
right.
not think there is not a single Jet who would have turned Chino over to the police.
Right.
Yeah.
No one.
Is what get is
Because
what
that
gets me
gives the
about
whole
that.
game away, right?
Exactly.
You
right.
literally can't do that
and-
because we've already seen at different points in the movie, including what happens after the Rumble, that the moment that the police find out any sort of sign of gang violence, it's going to get real bad real fast for both gangs.
Right.
Yeah, they're covering every street in the West Side.
Totally. So the last image of the movie, that like the message that the movie leaves us with is that the cops are part of restoring order. Right. The cops are part of this. Like justice has to be meted out on Chino. That is how we return to like a peaceful.
Yeah, he's like
That
the
is
fucking Christ, right? Like that's no, seriously though.
But the movie doesn't treat him like the movie.
Yeah.
The movie treats him like a criminal who has to go to jail.
Right.
Right. And it's
Yeah.
like it's the very last shot of the movie is sort of supportive of the system in the way the rest of the movie is not.
Yeah.
And it was very jarring to see that, and it was very jarring then to have, like, again, this like Puerto Rican character turn another Puerto Rican kid over to the police. It seemed like it was a super.
It doesn't feel organic to her character either.
But it just didn't feel. It was a very weird pro cop
even just
message
like
at the end of the movie. It
even
didn't feel
just
super
like the
pro-cop.
basic emotions of the scene don't make any sense.
Yeah.
What is this? Why is that the center of our final moment of the play? Everything just kind of drifts off.
Yeah.
And then the credits roll, even without the thematic elements, and you can't avoid the thematic elements because it's just so bizarre.
Right, and that's kind of what I'm saying too. Is like the thing about if it were what we saw before we saw the guys take, if the last image we saw, then we would like have, that would be the last thing we were left with is the unity of the two gangs.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's not the thing that Spielberg leaves us with. This thing that Spielberg leaves us with is the police arresting the guy who killed Tony.
Yeah, imagine.
It's just such a, and it's done in such a boring way too. It's just like
it's just like
we walk
here you
this
go.
way.
Yeah, it doesn't
the
even
car's
show
coming this
anything.
way.
Right.
There you go. It's like, imagine if Romeo and Juliet ended with never has there been a tale of more woe than that of Juliet and her Romeo. Also, Friar Lawrence just got arrested for giving these kids poison.
AJ, I am so thrilled to tell you this.
Oh?
He did get arrested originally. At least in the, I don't know if the
way.
Italian story has him arrested, but the English translation of it has him and the nurse arrested for their part
And
in the
that's
deception.
the end of the play?
Yeah, would you believe that the author was a Protestant of the book that Shakespeare adapted into the play?
Interesting.
That Shakespeare was obviously like, that's fucking stupid.
Yeah, because Shakespeare knew how to write a play, usually.
Yeah, like even in this case, where I don't like this play so much.
Get out of my head! He figured it out eventually.
Yeah, so it's like on every single level, it's just baffling.
Yeah.
The action of the scene is strange, the emotional content of it, and certainly the thematic content. Why Stephen?
Why, Steve?
Like, here's a guy whose last shot in Munich, right, was pulling away from the two characters talking, and you see the World Trade Center.
Munich,
Right,
by the
spoilers
way,
for
which
Munich.
we'll be talking about in a few weeks.
Yeah, he knows how to end a fucking movie, right?
Yeah.
He did the
that's what I
shot of the
mean, right? Like,
fucking
it's not-
Lost Ark being dragged into the warehouse.
E.T.,
Everything,
come on.
It's very intentional. It's not
Yeah.
like it's.
He knows-
this
he
is
knows
the
what he's
final
doing.
Image
Yes.
that he wants
Yes.
to
And I
leave
would
us with.
love to be in his head for why that's
and I have
the
no
case.
idea why it's the final image. It's so I don't know.
One of the things that happens with these Disney remakes, or so I hear, where they try to make them woke or like more feminist or whatever, they end up tripping on their own dick, and it's worse somehow.
Yeah.
Well,
Does that happen with West Side Story, in your opinion?
I don't think West Side Story is worse than the other
what
West
it
Side
used to
Story. I do think.
you don't have anyone like putting on like the darkest makeup that they can find. And
Natalie Wood is a pretty low bar to clear.
I do think that a lot of the attempts to smooth over the racism in the original sort of serve the purpose of pointing up how racist the original is. I think,
absolutely.
I think there's like one thing that happens with America that I really think is very funny is that they try so in the original, the women are upset because their boyfriends are all in a gang, and like that's
right.
and it sucks, and like okay, and they get into this song where Maria says like, where Anita is like they're gonna fight because of Maria, and like and fuck this, and I would never want to go back. Why do you guys want to go back?
Right.
And she gets into this song, and that song is a problem, right?
Yeah. On a number of levels.
On a number of levels,
right,
the song is a
because
problem.
I mean, and to be honest, like the first time Sondheim's writing it, here's this 20-year-old Jewish kid just writing essentially a song where one side makes its case, the other side makes its case, and he's not really giving any kind of
Sure.
thought to
Well,
what that means.
And I also
it
think there's
comes
something,
out,
there's something interesting
Yeah.
there, I think, also in like Sondheim's milieu of like probably hearing older people complain about the old country.
Yeah,
in a way
that's
that is
true.
not loaded down with like the baggage that like Puerto Ricans actually faced in coming over
Right.
here. But I think that like in the new one, what ends up happening is like Ariana DeBose's Anita like is a businesswoman. She wants to start a new business here, and she has like
Yeah.
opportunity, and she does not want to go to Puerto Rico and just be the mother to Bernardo's kids,
Right.
which is like interesting, but also like in their attempt to make up for what leads into the song, just like make a like statement about how like Puerto Rican men are like macho,
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
want women in
Yeah.
the kitchen with like barefoot in the kitchen, which is like not like. It's not. It is an overcorrection of wokeness in one direction, and
Right.
that ends up tripping into being like regressive again.
And it creates a series of additional dramaturgical problems that aren't necessarily laid out in the play as written.
But then again, I think later do this interesting thing where she, where again, like I don't like the way it's written, but I do like that they turn her assault into also a moment where she cannot escape from the fact that America is bad.
Right.
You know, and it's a turning point in her character also, where she realizes for the first time the like depths of like the problem she's in. Living here as an immigrant, you know, so I think there's a number of moments like that. Like I think there's like making the Sharks like possibly affiliated with Puerto Rican nationalists.
Right, they're like
cool.
politically active as
Right,
opposed
yeah.
to just being
They're
teenagers
like
in a gang
politically
destroying their lives.
interested at least.
Yeah.
But also then that's like, well, okay, but like,
Yeah.
So then what is that? Okay, but there's like implications to that are interesting that don't get explored. I think the way that when I looked at the track list and was like, oh no, they're singing La Borinqueña in this. I thought like this is just not a good container. This musical is not a good container for these
Sure.
ideas. So it was striking to me that like they seemed to be politically affiliated in some way, but the movie does not discuss that in any kind of like there's a lot of heavy implications, especially because, as I said, a few years before this was you know this takes place, a bunch of people infiltrated Congress
Right.
and shot it up. You know, there was an attempt on President Truman's life. Over the decades preceding this, there were a number of like bombings and U.S. military massacres on the island, and and so like when you open this box, you're bringing a lot of stuff into it that now not talking about it seems very apparent. It feels very like suddenly all of that is part of this, and it sits poorly on the musical.
Sure. Yeah, the foundation's it's cracked.
This is, I mean, maybe this is too trite to ask, but it's like, should West Side Story just kind of go on the shelf?
Well, yeah, right. Exactly.
Is everyone just better off if we kind of pack it away and maybe theaters just produce your work, which would be cheaper? And also like you guys would be getting in on the ground floor of seriously, just produce Matt's work for Jesus fucking sake.
Should produce my plays
at the very beginning too, which was the question that I had when I saw that Steven Spielberg was doing a fucking West Side Story adaptation. Why do this play in the year of our Lord 2020?
Well, I mean, that's what
some really good shot ideas.
Well, students on UPR were saying that same thing.
Yeah.
And the fact that this was happening, this was being filmed at the same time that a Dutchman was putting on his weird, like minimal, trying to make no points version of West Side Story, right? Where his whole thing was just
put
like
as much water on stage for a high dance show as possible. Let's put electrics on there. Let's try and kill these kids.
I think Ivo van Hove, saying that he made no points. I think Ivo van Hove has that weird thing of a lot of European directors taking on like American work, which is like, well, just take the race out of it. Just take.
You're so focused on race.
Just, we need to talk about this. It's just like it's the story. The story is beautiful. The story is Romeo and Juliet. The race stuff is the point. That's what It's and so when you start to remove like the things that make it the thing, if you make the witches real. It's a problem, right? It's not the play anymore.
Just release a wolf on stage.
I miss the wolf.
The Times did a really interesting piece where they had a bunch of people come together to talk about this. It was Matt Lopez, it was a couple of Puerto Rican cultural critics, and it was Jesse Green.
That's an oof the size of Texas.
So, but like
notoriously a very race sensitive critic, Jesse Green.
But the thing about it was a weird thing because it was an article about like, should we talk about West Side Story racist?
It's asking the question:
should we like still do it? Right. And a bunch of culture critics, Matt Lopez saying like, I think Matt Lopez being from the mainland, like myself, is like, I have a complicated relationship with this piece. And Matt Lopez has actually written an interesting derivative work about, I think his grandfather was a background in the movie.
Oh, wow.
And so he has a piece about like, he wrote a play about that, but also growing up in that neighborhood as it was getting, but I mean like a really tough read of like where you just watch Jesse Green say like having this conversation is ridiculous and the Jets are also treated stereotypically. Well, like musicals aren't realistic. So
Jesse
what are you
Green
do?
# all lives matter.
I really hated that part where Tony couldn't screw in a light bulb.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Do not cut that. That's
I'm keeping it. It's just like
more Jets just kept showing up.
Action! How do you screw this light bulb?
How do you think you're gonna get that in there?
I don't know. How do you screw in a light bulb?
Turning it
John
left.
Mulaney.
It's probably gonna have to turn it left faster.
That was a good riff.
It's a great riff. Oh, God. Classic Worst Possible World riff right there.
There is an interesting case to be made that we're like over it. I think the most important thing, I don't know, I don't think like anything ever goes on the shelf forever, but like I do think it just has to be stewarded by Puerto Rican artists in the future. I think that any sort of problematic, Porgy and Bess is best handled by African-American artists.
Absolutely.
Because it's a musical with a lot of impact that a lot of people have complicated relationships to. And ultimately it's the people who are going to be negatively affected by it who should sort of figure out how it exists in the future.
Evo gets so much license to manipulate works that go far beyond like what you would usually see in a production.
That's because he's
Dutch. But like he does it in America.
Yeah.
And I wonder can that ever be extended to like a Puerto Rican artist who wants to use like major parts of the intellectual property, but, you know, including the music or even the dance,
Right.
but to do something that iterates on it rather than simply being a revival of, of West Side Story.
Or to put it another much more direct way, could a Puerto Rican director and playwright get the same license that Tony Kushner and Steven Spielberg were able to get on West Side Story?
Yeah.
Especially now that all the creatives are dead.
Except for Tony Kushner and Steven
No,
Spielberg.
I mean the original. I mean the original. ones.
No,
I mean,
seriously,
Arthur Lawrence and
like, what do you think? And like, what would it take for that to be a reality?
I think reading that piece in the Times and then remembering like the actual roles of the people involved, the person who is the most staunchly in defense of the musical and who thinks everybody's culturally derived criticisms and sort of pain around it are ridiculous, is the critic at the Times.
Yeah.
And then, you know, and also look at stuff like Ivo van Hove's that, as you said, like just like was like, well, what if the gangs were not what they are?
What if nothing is the way that it is?
That was okay.
What if screens? I need more screens.
What if, you know, I think there's still a strong sense that like an artist of color doing something is political
Inherently.
Inherently.
Yeah.
Well, in a way that like a white artist doing something is considered to be devoid of politics.
Yeah.
That like there is such a thing as like a neutral creative choice that comes out of a white artist that it is not informed by other things.
Yeah.
You know, Elena Schwarzsky, who's one of the writers who is in that article, you know, how she's just biased. Right.
Yeah.
But, you know, because she's Puerto Rican, she's too biased.
As opposed to
opine.
Jesse Green of the failing New York Times, who has no bias whatsoever.
Right. Well, that's the thing. It's like, it's this idea that like I am white, so I am neutral, as opposed to like I am white, and so actually I also have a very culturally informed viewpoint on these things. And so I think, especially on Broadway, there's a resistance to classic musicals being changed unless they are in the hands of a trusted white person.
Yeah.
For some reason, they're trusting Ivo van Hove.
A very untrustworthy white person by token of the fact that he's Dutch.
The more problematic the musical, the more important it is to preserve it for these people, right?
Yeah.
This idea that like, I know that there are problems, and so we must protect those problems from the SJWs.
Yeah.
Whereas like Oklahoma, like is considered, I don't think people think of it as problematic or as political in the same way.
Yeah.
And so this production that took a lot of liberties that people were not super happy with, all of them, but some people super liked.
Yeah.
It was able to, you know, like you get a lot of like company, you know, you can change the gender of the, but I think that there is a real sense of like, if something is a political like hot button, we have to keep it from people who want to fix it. We have to make sure it's a classic. It is beautiful. It is everything that I remember from my childhood.
Don't take away this thing I like. Don't make me think about this thing I like.
When I liked this thing, it was fine.
Yep.
No one told me it was bad, and so now it is the people who have problems with it that are bad.
And even,
because I can't be wrong. I can't have a changing opinion about a piece of art. It has to.
Right. And it's a lot of it too comes down to like issues of nostalgia. It's like people have, with musicals especially, there's, and I noticed this particularly with the canon, right? With like R&H, there is this deep-seated
Rodgers and Hart.
Yes.
Like the Mikado, you see this a lot with like
exactly. With Gilbert and Sullivan, right?
Right.
If there's something that we really need to protect, it's the complicated and robust works of fucking Gilbert and Sullivan.
But what I wanted to say here is that for a lot of people, and specifically, honestly, for a lot of white people, the things that they find core to that show, the songs, the characters,
The dance.
the dance, yes, in many cases, everything in the same way that we see this around a lot of pop culture.
Yeah.
You know, we see this with games, we see this with movies, we see this with so many different things where people see the entirety of the thing and they have become so attached to that thing in its entirety. It has shaped their perspectives. It has shaped what they believe that good art is. And so it's scary to let any of it go. And that fear is the ultimate animating force.
Well, and they adapt it as part of their personality too. If there's something wrong with the thing, then there must be, because I enjoyed it, there must be something wrong with me. So they take it as a personal attack, which never gets anywhere. And it's also, it's the art is not you.
So Matt, I want to ask you, because like your journey with this show is, I mean, this was a West Side Story was a big part of your life in some way. It was something that you were aware of, that you then started to develop more complicated feelings about. And you write about it, and you write about a lot of the complex things that you engage with differently as an adult, right? You have a lot of work that engages with the Bible, or Catholicism in general, comic books.
If you read it, right?
Star Trek.
Yeah. Star Wars, Star Trek. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Star Trek's better.
And one of these many fascinations that you interact with is, of course, West Side Story. How you've iterated on like ideas about like Maria and her life after. Is this something that you feel obligated to because you're in this industry, and like it's something that there might be an expectation that you interact with, or is it something that is still like something that you're actually actively processing?
I think it's an interesting. I keep saying like it's an interesting. I'm very aware
It's okay.
of like this verbal.
The thing is, we all say it all the time. Next time you listen to a podcast, you'll hear it over and over and over again.
No, I'm never listening to a podcast again, though.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Good. That's what we want.
Scorched earth.
No more Broadway musicals. No more podcasts.
We're
No
done.
more white people.
We love white genocide, don't we, folks?
We sure do.
I don't know that I feel obligated, though I do feel there is kind of an inevitability for the stage in the way that there is often going to be conversation with influences, inevitable conversation around identity when you're writing about identity. And there's also, I think, like it is so much a part of like the history of the medium that any sort of like interaction with the medium on the topic of like Puerto Rican identity is going to like, you know, like West Side Story, In the Heights is always going to be, I think, compared often favorably to West Side Story, but compared nonetheless.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of the narrative around In the Heights is like that it's like finally, you know. But it's like,
Right.
but that's,
Yeah.
but it's part of the conversation.
Yeah.
I think for me, because it is such a big part of like the presence of like Puerto Ricanness in media, in theater, it's something that I come back to a lot because it makes it a useful like vehicle. It's an interesting tool to talk about things, right? So I think in Natalie Wood is Not Puerto Rican, it is a way to discuss the like divide between Puerto Ricans born here and Puerto Ricans like still living on the island, sort of, and this more recent wave of migration, especially since Hurricane Maria. It's been a very potent kind of way for me to process, I think, like Americans' conceptions of Puerto Rico, of Puerto Ricans living here, of people who move here. Maria specifically is such a potent symbol of what we have thought of Puerto Ricans, Puerto Rican women.
What makes her such a potent symbol? What is it about her specifically?
I think I think the ubiquity of West Side Story has made her like the iconic Puerto Rican woman, and I think that like a lot of subsequent representations sort of like owe a lot to her. I think there's a lot of
Interesting.
There's a lot to her. There's a lot of this idea of being willful, but also being beautiful, of being like sexually and romantically available to white men. Anita's like the like sexy, world weary version, but Maria is the naive immigrant who doesn't know the ways of America,
Right.
and wants to be shown and it's because of her ubiquity and because of how familiar people are with West Side Story, even in the sort of scant realm of Latinx representation, so much of it is like Chicano, Mexican American in the country, and I think a lot of people, especially outside of New York City, like don't, or the tri-state area, like don't, I guess Florida too, don't have like a context for Puerto Ricanness, and so like West Side Story is like constantly referenced in discussions of like New York, in discussions of like gang culture, in discussions of like being Puerto Rican, and so when Hurricane Maria laid bare a lot of the like weird attitudes and kind of like, I think, general confusion and ignorance about the U.S.'s relationship to Puerto Rico, about the history of Puerto Rico and the U.S., about like what are the U.S. government's obligations to the island, about, even simple things like, are Puerto Ricans citizens? A weird insistence that Puerto Rico should be a state. We need to make Puerto Rico a state.
Yeah.
Puerto Rico has to be a state, like DC. DC should be a state, absolutely.
Well, because they're all going to be Democrats. And
They're
they're
all
going to
gonna be
give
Democrats.
me. They're going to give me my electoral votes.
Right.
Absolutely, right. Yes, they're going to. Right, they're going to give me my. Anyway, they're going to be. That's going to be a rude awakening. That island is not.
They're not all going to vote for President Kamala Harris? Come on.
Oh boy.
They it's fraud. And so I think because of West Side Story's like prominence in the wider U.S. conception of Puerto Ricans,
Yeah.
like I find myself coming back again and again to Maria, to the Sharks, and to in sort of like processing it through like derivative work and like.
So speaking of your work, where can people find? You're published somewhere, right?
No, I have.
Yes, you are. I have a fucking book with a play of
That's true.
yours
You
in
have a
it.
book with a short play of mine. If you can
I was about
find
to say, there's no way you're not fucking
Red
published.
Bull. Red Bull Theater has
Okay.
has a couple of anthologies from their short play competitions, and so I think Red Bull Anthology Volume 3 has
yeah. The best
for-
volume.
It's a with a catchy title like that.
It gives you wings.
Not nearly as good of a title as Flugtag.
My short play, a list of some shit I've killed,
Hell yeah.
which is like an adaptation of some Greek stuff, is in there. If you are a theater person, I am on New Play Exchange.
You can sign up. It's not expensive.
It's not expensive.
Not expensive. You get to read them.
You get to
lot
read
of really good
AJ's plays.
Oh,
Yeah.
boo.
I think no, I think mine
Brian's
aren't
place.
on there because
Oh, you didn't put them on there?
No, I haven't. My credit card expired, and so I think
Brian's not there anymore.
No, he's good.
Recently,
So,
the 24-hour plays.
Oh, yeah. Is that clip with the rules
Yes.
cars anymore?
Yeah, so they just recently re-uploaded it because they came to an agreement with
Awesome.
Actors Equity that allowed them to put up some stuff in perpetuity.
Oh, fantastic.
Fuck yeah.
So,
We'll link it in the show notes.
And it was a staff pick, right? It was specifically like
yes,
they
so it
were
was a
like, this
staff
is
pick,
like.
and they were like, cool, this was something from the archives we want to put up
That was
forever.
that was all the way back in 2020,
That was
right?
back in 2020. I was
Yeah.
reached to do a 24-hour monologue, and found out that they were pairing me with Raul Esparza
Yeah.
of Hannibal fame.
It's a beautiful play
It's-
about a man who is doing his best to get over a death in the family through food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matt, I don't know if I ever actually even told you this, but when I watched that, it was in a very deep depression in the pandemic, and it really it allowed me to feel my emotions fully, and it's a beautiful, beautiful piece, and
thank you.
You should check it out.
So
if you can.
I think
Frijoles.
So I think the lesson that we should all walk away with tonight,
yeah.
having talked about West Side Story, is forget it. Go check out what Matt wrote. I'm the worst of all possible Brian's.
New plays. I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm Matt.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
All right, folks, we've got links to Matt's work in the episode notes and over on Twitter. Follow him over there at BarboRobot, a name that still gives me a headache. Anyway, this show is brought to you not by the Dutch, unless, some of our patrons are Dutch. That's right. It's brought to you by patrons over at Patreon, including some of our newest patrons, Tin Can Hitman, Pippo, Noah Bruckner, Last Man on Earth 01, and Jesse Tate, with a very special thank you to Silverbear 909, Ashley Stoneman, Dara Swisher, John Johnson, Nikola Donov, Hannah White, Timmy Sexton, and Tony Diddy. Keep it cool, boys. Real cool.